Despite my borderline social disorder and the fact that I missed a grade in elementary school because of the neighborhood I lived in and the school I attended, I kept up when it came to intimate relationships. I lived in an area that belonged to the lower middle class. I don't know if this was a factor or not, but there were many beautiful women my age. During college, I only lived at home because one of the top 5 engineering universities in the world was just a 10-minute drive from my house. I helped active women in my area with their studies by assisting them with their homework, taking home tests, and teaching them various subjects in high school and community college. In return, I received advice on intimate issues. This exchange resulted in a high level of satisfaction for both me and the women between the ages of 18 and 21 whom I mentored. I received many recommendations because I was known as a patient, reserved, and intelligent person. I was able to find a common language with my friends on an intellectual level, which made it easier for them to understand the subjects in which I helped them. In intimate moments, I always treated them with kindness and respect and never disclosed the details of our meetings to anyone else, although I suspect they may have shared them with each other. During this time, I had intimate relationships with 11 women, many of whom I met several times, although I never had a romantic relationship with any of them. The dynamics between us were purely transactional. The exchange of information took place in my interests. Only one woman, who went by the street name Jezebel, not her real name, stood out during this time. Despite not showing her the proper gentleness, it was not due to a lack of desire to be kind. Jezebel was my age, a tall and strong girl, and she was not overweight. Most of her excess weight was in her upper torso and muscular thighs. Although her face was unremarkable, those who knew her, including me, believed she possessed a body akin to that of Aphrodite. Anyone who didn't prefer petite women would consider Jezebel's figure to be perfect. She was very seductive, enjoyed her intimate life, and easily attracted partners. In addition to her athletic physique, she participated in numerous softball and basketball leagues. Although she was not the most educated person, she was far from stupid and had greater ambitions than many in our society. Her main goal was to create her own studio or website for adults. I provided her with tutoring services, mainly in math and business skills, to help her achieve this goal. Jezebel confessed to me, and I believed her, that I was the only person she allowed to have an unprotected intimate relationship with her because she was sure that I did not have sexually transmitted diseases. Regardless of my efforts, she seemed to enjoy the experience. Whether she was pretending at the moment of climax or experiencing the real effect, she always let out a primal scream and assured me afterward that it was amazing. Jezebel was the only woman I knew who didn't ask me for some academic favor before sleeping with me. I clearly remember those 6 times when we were close, and they left a lasting impression on my social clumsiness. One evening, she unexpectedly called me and offered to have a good time in bed. In response, I immediately went to her apartment, and she, of course, was not indifferent. Although I never fell in love with Jezebel, she was very dear to me, and I was ready to do anything for her, even without expecting anything in return. In my senior year of college, I created a high-tech and encrypted proximity sensor that could be easily programmed, similar to the Easy Pass system used on toll roads in the United States. My invention was specifically designed for secure systems. Various versions of my sensors have been used by corporations with their own systems, numerous government agencies at both the state and federal levels, as well as the military. To participate in patenting my own inventions, I had to get a security clearance. My inventions generated significant profits through patent royalties, which allowed me to create 2 companies to market products and develop new ones. Lacking managerial skills and focusing solely on invention and design, I instructed my lawyers to create various shell and holding corporations to control the activities of my companies. I have retained ownership of the shares of the main holding company. To get to the truth, you need a high level of sophistication and a significant amount of time. I have never used my tangled network of companies to evade taxes. However, some of them were strategically located offshore to protect my assets. Only the CEOs and finance directors of my 2 operating companies knew that I had supreme power. To everyone else, I presented myself as just the head of the new product development department at one of the operating companies. By the age of 24, I had laid all the necessary foundations and was ready for a relationship with a woman, but my path was not easy due to borderline social anxiety and the fact that I no longer used my intelligence to attract partners. Despite these obstacles, I stubbornly tried to make acquaintances by visiting various online platforms and social gatherings. Finally, at the age of 26, I met a special girl, Allison. She was undoubtedly the most attractive woman who ever reciprocated my romantic feelings. Not only did she have a beautiful face, but she also had an amazing figure. Looking back at our rather ordinary courtship, I realized it was more superficial than I initially thought. I was so fascinated by her appearance, especially her impressive qualities, that I did not notice some of the qualities usually appreciated in a partner. Throughout our relationship, one thing that caught my eye was her complete disinterest in my work. She never showed curiosity or asked about it. Allison seemed uninterested and pretended not to understand anything when I mentioned my job, showing a complete lack of curiosity. Surprisingly, her lack of interest became her advantage when it came to the prenuptial agreement. Gail, a respected lawyer who helped me create corporations, strongly recommended that I sign a prenuptial agreement. Despite my hesitation, Gail made it clear that she would no longer work with me if I did not present the prenuptial agreement to Allison before the wedding. Gail drew up a simple prenuptial agreement that excluded from common ownership any shares, interests, or royalties related to companies or patents owned by either party in the amount of more than 10% on the date of marriage or acquired during the marriage. Allison asked her father to review the document, after which she signed it without hesitation. The intimate relationship between Allison and me has always been satisfying. After 2.5 years of marriage, we were expecting our first child. During a spontaneous visit to my parents, I unexpectedly met Jezebel on the street. We decided to meet for a cup of coffee, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that she, as always, looked amazing. She talked enthusiastically about her latest project, and I couldn't help but admire her confidence and style. Despite my offer to buy my parents a new house in a more elite area, they preferred to stay in their friendly village with numerous friends. Meeting Jezebel and having a cup of coffee with her made my quick visit even more memorable. I told her a familiar story about a job for hire. Jezebel was in the process of creating an adult website but ran into financial difficulties. After asking her delicately about the situation, I found out that she only needed another $25,000 to successfully launch the site. I promised to meet her again at the coffee shop in a week at the same time and mentioned that I might be able to introduce her to an investor. Jezebel was delighted at the prospect, hugged me warmly, and kissed me on the cheek as I left. I thought about this for a week. $25,000 seemed insignificant to me, and although the business she was interested in was questionable, I liked her anyway. A week later, we met again, and she looked even more stunning than before. She was dressed more provocatively, emphasizing her flawless figure, which I had the pleasure of observing back in my student years. At the same time, her face and hair looked even more radiant than before. As soon as the coffee was placed in front of us, I handed her an envelope with $25,000 in cash. Jezebel was stunned, tears streaming down her face. I'd never seen her like this, given her rugged appearance. Then she offered me ownership of the site, but I refused, insisting that the money was a gift without any conditions. She made a tempting offer, running her hand over my thigh and promising to make love to me like never before. I think that with her determination and physique, she would have fulfilled her promise, but at that moment, I respectfully refused, expressing my love for my wife instead. When we were saying goodbye, Jezebel, with tears in her eyes, remarked, "Your wife is very lucky," but she offered her help anyway. I replied, "Just be successful." Despite feeling a little awkward during the hug, I quickly stopped, feeling out of place. Jezebel was kind enough not to mention it. Allison and I had 2 more children, a daughter Whitney and then a son Jerry. Although I didn't name Whitney after Jezebel, I agreed with my wife when she suggested the name. Although my intimate relationship with Allison remained satisfactory, I gradually noticed her superficiality and materialistic tendencies. Despite this, I appreciated her for her other positive qualities and for the fact that she was the only woman I had ever loved. Most importantly, she gave me 3 wonderful children. Amber was one of them. At the center of this narrative was a 12-year-old girl who possessed the beauty of her mother and the best qualities of both Allison and me. She had intelligence on par with mine, achieving the same level of genius in tests, but at the same time surpassing me in social skills at the age of 10. Whitney also boasted a striking appearance, although she inherited some of my less remarkable features. Nevertheless, she was distinguished by kindness, compassion, and empathy, standing out as the most caring person I have ever met. She possessed a radiant presence capable of illuminating any room she entered. She was not only beautiful but also incredibly smart. Jerry, on the other hand, was an energetic and cheerful boy. It was obvious that he had inherited his athleticism from Allison. I tried to learn about baseball and basketball so that I could have meaningful conversations with him about his favorite sports. Despite his athleticism, Jerry was always kind-hearted, never spoke ill of others, and was always in a good mood. He had a strong relationship with his sisters, and they all got along harmoniously with each other. Despite having wonderful children, one might assume that I considered Allison an excellent mother, but that wasn't the case. Our main differences arose due to our parenting styles. I couldn't pinpoint the exact reason for this, maybe it was just jealousy, but Allison's relationship with Amber was strained. She was too strict, and her remarks were sometimes harsh. I repeatedly observed that Allison often mistreated Amber. It reached a breaking point by the time Amber turned 12. It became clear that she would only go anywhere with her mother in my presence. This became a serious problem when, one summer, Allison wanted to take the children to the lake house for a week, and I had to work. It took all my persuasion skills to convince Amber to go on this trip, and I had to have a serious conversation with Allison to ensure she would be kind to Amber during the holidays. Although Allison had the best relationship with Whitney and Jerry, she still had her moments with them. Despite being a stay-at-home mother, I spent as much time with the children as she did. She always had some classes, so the time I spent with them was usually more meaningful. Having been married for about 15 years, with 3 wonderful children and a wife I cared about very much, I was driving home from the airport after a one-night business trip. It was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Despite having informed Allison of my entire route, I called the family last night, but Allison didn't seem interested in our conversation, and I wasn't sure if she would be home when I arrived. I was looking forward to the opportunity to be intimate before the children returned from school at 3:30 p.m. When I stopped at the sign to turn onto my street, I noticed a familiar car passing by, a red Corvette driven by Roger Mayberry. He was one of the best salespeople in my company, specializing in the sale of military products. Despite not being an engineer, he was well versed in our technologies and had a natural charm, which allowed him to excel in his duties. Like all our employees, he had a high-level clearance, even higher than most, due to the sensitivity of the military application of our products. I wondered why Roger was here at this hour. Naively, I thought he might have some legitimate reason to be in this part of the city. A few minutes later, I arrived at my front door and entered the house. The next thing I remember was waking up in a hospital bed. As soon as I opened my eyes, a nurse ran into the room, followed shortly by a doctor. "How are you feeling, Mr. Banks?" asked the kind nurse named Nancy. "It's like my head is being squeezed," I moaned. "We are very glad that you woke up so quickly," she exclaimed, checking my indicators on a nearby monitor. "Why am I in the hospital, and how did I get here?" I asked as the doctor entered the room. "Hello, Mr. Banks. I'm Dr. Petra," a female doctor from India greeted me warmly. "Let me look at your eyes before answering your questions," she said as Nurse Nancy took my wrist. Dr. Petra took a light source out of her pocket and carefully examined my eyes, gently pushing the eyelids and the skin around the eyeballs apart. After a thorough examination, Dr. Petra stood up, and Nurse Nancy released my wrist. They both smiled as Dr. Petra informed me that I had a concussion. According to my wife, I tripped in the bedroom, fell backward on the marble floor in the hallway, and hit my head. Although I could have died, my vital signs were normal, and the concussion was most likely not as serious as it seemed at first. At the memory of what caused the fall, a wave of sadness swept over me. My eyes widened, and I let out a loud groan, feeling sick. Fortunately, Nurse Nancy worked quickly and managed to place the container under my chin in time. Although it was an unconventional vomit bag, the contents of my stomach got into it during vomiting, mostly bile since I hadn't had lunch that day. Having completely emptied my stomach, I leaned back in my chair, and Nancy applied a cold compress to my head. Dr. Petra then performed another examination and expressed surprise at my vomiting, suggesting that it might indicate a more serious concussion than initially thought. Maybe my immediate reaction was triggered by the memory of the emotional shock that led to my fall, I asked, perfectly understanding the likely answer. Yes, that's a plausible explanation, Dr. Petra said, stroking her chin. Have you experienced a similar crisis? Yes, I replied abruptly. I didn't handle my emotions very well when I realized that my wife had cheated on me, I added with a snort. After a short pause, I felt proud that I had not resorted to swearing in my outburst, but there was still a hint of worry in me. My doctors looked shocked, but I couldn't resist adding a little sarcasm. When I asked about my wife, Nancy explained that she had gone to pick up our children from school. Looking at my watch, I realized it was 3:28, so she was probably picking them up at that moment. Then Dr. Petra asked about my recent diet. Have you eaten anything recently? Petra asked, looking at me with concern written all over her face. No, not since about 8 o'clock in the morning, I replied. Since your vomiting seems to be caused by emotions and not a concussion, I strongly recommend that you eat something, especially before your wife returns with the children. I hesitated. Do you think I'll throw up again when I see her? Dr. Petra reassured me. No, I don't think so. Then she ordered Nurse Nancy, please ask the kitchen to bring a bowl of oatmeal immediately. I want oatmeal with cinnamon and raisins without brown sugar, I said to Nancy with a smile. The oatmeal arrived 5 minutes later. I ate quickly and was already starting to feel a little better when Nancy returned to my room and announced that I had company. 3 of my beloved children rushed to me, each of them trying to get to me first. I laughed and warned them not to touch my head or neck. Trying to hug all 3 of them with both hands, I listened to them all talking at the same time. I couldn't help but giggle, although laughing at the top of my voice would probably hurt too much. My physical and emotional state was in complete disarray, but the sight of the children lifted my spirits. I was so engrossed in our conversation that I almost didn't notice Allison standing next to me. Amber's tear-stained face brightened, and the other 2 were beaming with joy. Allison's expression as she watched our conversation was mixed, funny, and confused. I tried my best not to talk about my injury and instead turned the conversation to their recent classes. Allison tried to interrupt me with questions and comments, but I tried not to pay attention to her and avoided eye contact. After about 15 minutes of lively conversation, I noticed Nancy say something to Allison. Shortly after, Allison announced that it was time for the children to leave, as I was still in pain and needed to recover. She said goodbye to the children and promised to visit me the next day. Saying goodbye, the children smeared my hands with saliva. Amber seemed to be in a better mood than when she arrived, and Jerry seemed fine, but when Whitney looked at me from afar, sitting on a hospital bed, there were tears in her eyes. She hurriedly turned away, trying to hide her emotions. When the children left, Allison told them to wait in the elevator lobby while she stayed for a few minutes to talk to me. Then Allison came up to me. I didn't have the opportunity to fully think through my reaction and couldn't change the scenario I imagined, so I just closed my eyes and listened. Brian, I'm sorry you had to see me like this. I never wanted you to know I'm not the wife you deserve, she said, her voice full of remorse and sadness. I hope we can talk about it when you feel better. When she didn't get any reaction from me, she said, maybe tomorrow you'll be in the mood for a conversation. If you want to, just call me. Her last words hinted that she had no intention of visiting me in the hospital. It became clear that I needed to contact her and talk to her, otherwise, she wouldn't come. Dr. Petra returned about 20 minutes after Allison left. After another inspection, she noticed, you don't look too upset after talking to your wife. I corrected her. I haven't talked to my wife, I replied flatly. Despite the deep sadness of my lost life, I was determined to channel these emotions into fruitful work. I assured Nancy that I wouldn't be sick anymore. She smiled at my words and asked the doctor how long I needed to stay. The doctor advised me to spend another night in the hospital with the possibility of discharge the next day if the examination was successful, but I was instructed not to burden myself for at least a week and to refrain from returning to work for several days. The doctor's orders were not subject to discussion. She replied in as firm a voice as a woman of small stature is capable of. I promise, I grinned, then reached out and took her hand. That is, I promise if you don't tell my wife that you'll let me go on Friday morning. Of course, I can't ask you to lie to her, but if she's even interested, could you give a hint that I'll have to stay until Saturday? I think I can do that, Dr. Petra laughed. Unless I have to lie outright in response to a direct question, I'll tell Sister Nancy the same thing. After finishing a hearty dinner, I contacted my parents, with whom Allison did not communicate for reasons that seemed obvious. Then I called my assistant at work and asked him to bring a notebook and a pen. I was in no condition to start planning my tasks that evening, but I tried to be ready to complete them in the morning. As I predicted, Allison arrived with the children around 3:50 p.m. on Thursday. As expected, she hadn't bothered to visit me the day before, and I wasn't going to contact her either. Although Nancy claimed that she called the medical center only once to check on me, by the time the kids arrived on Thursday, I was already feeling much better. This was due not only to my physical recovery but also to the fact that I had a very productive day. I was visited by several colleagues from my office, my lawyer Gail, who helped me draw up a prenuptial agreement, and my parents even stopped by for lunch. Although none of this had anything to do with my research on proximity sensors, it was all about planning my future outside of work. After spending half an hour with the children, Nancy came as I had asked earlier and insisted that I needed to rest. Allison came up to me as she had the day before, but this time I didn't close my eyes while she was talking. Honey, you didn't get in touch today to discuss our situation, she said softly. It seems like I'm not worth checking out if I'm not trying to contact you, I replied with a note of sarcasm, trying to downplay it but probably failing. My love, she whispered softly, I didn't want to bother you if you weren't in the mood to talk. I'll probably be busy this weekend, my love, I replied sarcastically. Brian, I am so sorry. I really hope that after this we can move on, she murmured. Then she took my hand and kissed it, but I remained emotionless. As she left, she said goodbye quietly, waving her hand slightly at me. I was not indifferent to the fact that she never once mentioned her love for me or the termination of her affair with Roger Mayberry. I could only catch a hint of sincere regret that she had been caught. The remaining 10% of my plan, which still needed to be completed, was now easy to solve. Shortly before visiting hours ended, Allison's parents came to see me. I was stunned until they delicately explained the reason for their visit. It seems that Allison didn't want to threaten me with losing custody of the children in the event of our divorce, so her parents did it instead. Allison has admitted her mistake, her mother said, taking my hand. Really? I asked sarcastically. After a long pause, her mother replied, You know that very well. That's what caused your accident. I just hope you find the strength to forgive her, Brian. You are such a good father and a loving person, and I know it will destroy you if you are not around your children every day. You're right about that, of course, Ruth, I said grimly. The gloominess was just a pretense. The most important thing in my plan was to get sole custody of the children. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, after Allison's parents gave me a message that I knew their daughter wanted to send, they left. Any uncertainty about my future actions disappeared. On Friday morning, Dr. Petra performed another checkup, after which she approved my release. Remember that you shouldn't strain yourself for at least a week, she advised. Scout's honor, I replied, trying to say the Boy Scout greeting. Not being a Boy Scout, I wasn't sure how accurate my gesture was, but at least I made Dr. Petra laugh. After thanking Nancy, I tried to give her $500 in cash, but she had to refuse. Instead, I gently hugged her and left with my assistant Jack before 10 o'clock in the morning. Getting back at Roger Mayberry was a piece of cake. I could have just asked for him to be fired, but that wasn't enough for me. My goal was to completely ruin his career. Simply finding him another job in a similar field with almost the same salary would be an unsatisfactory punishment. I wanted to ensure that he lost his security clearance and would not be able to find a job with the same salary and status as he had now. On the advice of Gail and her proposed divorce expert, as well as having access to Roger's bank details and his direct deposits, I decided to meet with Jezebel. Why with her? My assistant drove me to Jezebel's office, but I asked him to wait in the car. Although Jack was aware of all my plans, I felt obligated to talk to Jezebel alone. Despite the fact that I called in advance, Jezebel seemed surprised and glad to see me. "Hi Jezebel," I smiled as she approached me with her striking figure. "I have a concussion, so I can't hug you as tightly as I'd like. Maybe we'll just kiss each other's hands." "Oh, you scoundrel," she teased, giggling. "You probably got a concussion just so I couldn't hug you." We exchanged hand kisses, a rather unsatisfactory greeting. Jezebel looked amazing, dressed fashionably and professionally, radiating an eternal sensuality that seemed untouched by years. "Come into my office," she insisted, squeezing my hand tightly. After expressing my delight at being reunited with Jezebel, I quickly moved on to the reason for my visit. "I need your help, Jezebel," I confessed, feeling sadness rise in me. "Anything, Brian," she replied gently, taking my hand. "I'm ready to help you in any way I can. You made my dream come true." "I totally agree as long as there is no harm." Her words, accompanied by a warm smile, brought me more joy than I could have imagined. "You got it," I replied with a laugh. I told her all the details of the situation that made me turn to her for help, including my emotional reaction and why I needed her support. I emphasized the importance of my children by proudly showing her the photos. When I mentioned that my second child was named Whitney, she suddenly paused. "Did you name her Whitney?" she sighed in disbelief. I understood her thoughts perfectly and, despite the current situation, I saw nothing wrong with embellishing the truth a little. "Yes, she was named after my beloved before the wedding," I said with a grin. This caused a rush of emotions in her, and tears welled up in her eyes. "You scoundrel, I've cried for you only twice in the last decade," I giggled, gently taking her hand. "Tears of happiness are a wonderful thing. How can I help you shed them now?" Wiping away her tears, she made a request that took me by surprise. "I would like to ask you to use your website to post explicit materials involving my wife and send payment for them to her bank account." When the initial shock passed, we discussed the situation in detail. She had some great suggestions and one particularly brilliant idea. "You have to make sure that this is never traced back to you and that no one finds out about our previous relationship," she advised. "A relationship? Is that what you call it?" I joked. "Oh hush," she laughed. "Now it's my turn to teach you a lesson. I know someone who can help with this on a paid site even more popular than mine. No question, just transfer to him the funds that he'll then transfer to your wife's bank account. I will contact him immediately." In a short 4-minute phone conversation with Jezebel's friend, everything was organized. She informed me of the required format of the videos and assured me that all the money I would provide would be transferred to her friend, and an equal amount to Allison's account. In addition, my friend will require your wife's signature on the contract, which has a release clause. Can you trick her or convincingly reproduce it? I confidently stated, "I can." She replied, "I'll send it to you today." I suggested, "Wait until tomorrow. I will create a new email account in the library specifically for this purpose and will contact you as soon as she signs." As I left Jezebel's office, I grinned, feeling inspired. Before leaving, I risked a gentle kiss on her lips. Fortunately, my wife insisted that the credit card be issued exclusively in her name shortly after our wedding. I hadn't paid much attention to them before, but now I was determined to check the bank accounts issued only in her name. I knew that I would easily find these numbers in the documents scattered around the house: Roger and Allison's bank account numbers, Allison's credit card number, my own funds for financing, and Jezebel's help. I had everything I needed for revenge. In addition, my loyal assistant Jack was always there to support me, and I knew that I could count on him in any situation. It is impossible not to note Jack's unwavering loyalty and dedication to our cause. He is not just my secretary but my reliable assistant. Among all my employees, he is the highest paid, second only to the CEO and CFO of my companies. Having an engineering degree, he is excellent at analyzing data and implementing technical improvements in my ambitious projects. Despite his impressive qualifications, he is always ready to do more to support me. This was noticeable when he picked me up from the hospital and waited for me at Jezebel's. In addition, he was an outstanding first division football player in college, and in his senior year, he played as a middle linebacker. He's 6 feet 2 inches tall and a real asset to my team. He weighs almost 245 pounds of muscle, so finding jackets that fit him and won't tear at the arms is not an easy task. Despite the potential risk of revenge, I planned everything carefully and did not lose hope. After Jack dropped me off at the house, I didn't check to see if Allison was there and instead had a bite to eat before calling her cell phone. After lunch, I called Allison on her cell phone. "Hello dear, I see you called me," she purred, noticing my number on the caller ID. "No need," I replied coldly, depriving my tone of any warmth. "I'm leaving early and I'll take the kids for milkshakes. We'll be home around 5:30 p.m. "Oh, I have to cook a nice dinner for you when you get back," she purred, trying to sound cheerful. "Don't spoil the kids' dinner." "Thanks for the parenting tips," I added sarcastically. "See you at 5:30 p.m. The children were glad to see me and eagerly asked about my well-being, excitedly talking about their recent activities. Their faces lit up even more when I mentioned that we would go to the nearest store for milkshakes, their favorite treat. While we were all enjoying milkshakes, I decided to sit down with them and explain that there would be some changes in the future, assuring them that it wasn't their fault. Although I tried to keep my tone calm and direct, Amber saw through my facade. "I understand what you're getting at," she hinted. "If you and Mom get divorced, I want to live with you," she said. Whitney, shocked, asked, "Are you getting a divorce?" I answered quickly, "Let's not think about the worst for now." I calmed them both down, especially Whitney, who had a worried expression on her face. "Your mom and I are going through some difficulties right now, and I do not know how everything will turn out. But I want you to always remember that Mom and I love you more than anything in the world. You 3 beautiful creatures are not the cause of our problems." Amber surprised me once again. "You love us with all your heart, don't you, Dad?" "And Mom loves us," Jerry chimed in. Amber answered quickly, "Don't be too sure, kid." Wanting to defuse the tense situation, I gently put my hand on Amber's arm. "Dear, I believe that Mom deeply loves all of you. It's just that sometimes it's hard for her to express it. Let's not judge her, okay? Let's hope for the best." Whitney snorted softly, but Jerry and Amber seemed to put aside their doubts. Jerry, with all the sincerity of an 8-year-old child, asked if I would come to his Little League game at noon the next day. I couldn't help but grin. "I wouldn't miss this event for anything, son," I assured him. Turning to my daughters, I asked cheerfully, "Girls, what do you have planned for Saturday?" Unfortunately, I missed my usual Thursday newscast due to my hospital stay, but by the time we got home around 5:20 p.m., all 3 children were in a good mood. I made sure that at least one child stayed between me and Allison during her greeting, as I was still afraid of any physical contact with her. Later in the evening, when the children went to bed, I retired to the guest room. "Don't you want to talk?" Allison asked, worried. "I have a splitting headache from the concussion and I just need to take pain pills and get some sleep," I explained. I quickly drank 2 Tylenol tablets, passing them off as painkillers prescribed by a doctor, and closed the door to rest. "I can talk at any time," Allison said, closing the guest room door behind her. Avoiding real conversations or intimacy with Allison over the weekend turned out to be surprisingly easy for me. I started implementing my plan without any problems. The first tasks were simple. I used Allison's credit card to order 2 small high-tech video cameras and motion detectors for quick delivery to the house on Monday. I printed out the contract that Jezebel sent me and then quickly deleted it. I also printed out new benefit and health insurance forms from my company's database, putting the contract penultimate in the stack and noting where Allison should put her signature. Knowing that Allison would be accommodating over the weekend but not for long, I handed her the documents on Sunday, explaining that they were intended for medical insurance, disability registration, and other purposes. I have updated the life insurance forms for work, making my wife and children co-beneficiaries. I left the documents with her, knowing that she would not read them all but only skim through the first few pages. When she saw her name on the list of beneficiaries, she smiled, reassured that I was not going to leave her. she brought me the signed documents, interrupting my card game with Whitney and Jerry. "Darling," she purred, handing me the papers. I casually tossed them into my briefcase and continued playing cards. I also contacted the CEO of the company where Roger Mayberry worked and asked to check the safety of 5 people in his department due to the sensitive nature of our work. Just as some companies are required to conduct random testing for prohibited substances, employees may not realize that their employer, not the government, is the initiator of this process. On Monday morning, after the children left for school, Allison felt compelled to discuss the matter. "We can't avoid discussing what happened," she said firmly, sitting down across from me at the kitchen table. I resisted the urge to question our relationship and instead confessed, "Allison, I'm still trying to process everything. I still haven't fully realized what I saw. I need to clear my mind before we can have a meaningful conversation. I will not act rashly." "All right, dear," she replied, sounding satisfied though not entirely happy. "I hope you feel better soon. I want to show you how much I care about you. My children and I miss you." I forced a smile and answered, "I miss them too. I have a social committee meeting at the country club in half an hour, but I'll be back at 2 o'clock to pick up the kids." "Can you handle it without me?" she asked. I wanted to say, "I'll find out soon," but I restrained myself. "Have a good time." "I'll be fine," I replied. She was making it too easy. About 30 minutes after she left, a courier delivered the cameras. I called Jack and together we quickly, in less than an hour, installed cameras, switches, and motion sensors in the master bedroom. To avoid leaving fingerprints or DNA, we worked with all the equipment using latex gloves. The next task was to send a signal to Allison's computer. If I was competent with computers, then Jack was an expert. All we had to do was find out her password and then, in just 10 minutes, connect the cameras to her computer. After installing the most effective password cracking program on my laptop, I connected my device to it and got to work. Jack, without taking off his latex gloves, outlined the plan. As we started the program, Jack began to suggest what we could do while waiting, but he was interrupted by a beep. Curious, I asked if the program had gone wrong. Jack assured me that this was not the case and, grinning, informed me that the password had already been hacked. Surprised, I asked how this was possible. Jack explained that the program first goes through 1,000 of the most common passwords and then moves on to more complex algorithms. Laughing, he said that Allison's password was Princess, the 28th most common password according to the program. I couldn't help but laugh at such predictability. She always ignored my advice about technology, so why wouldn't she listen when I suggested using random characters for a password? But Jack kept his promise, and 10 minutes later, the camera footage was being recorded into a file on Allison's computer. After another 5 minutes, I could access this file from my office and control the cameras and motion detectors remotely. On Tuesday, feeling good, I went to work. Before leaving, I activated the cameras and motion detectors, ensuring the safety of the house. I arranged for the transfer of $10,000 from a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands to Roger Mayberry's bank account. Feeling emotionally stable and physically recovered from the concussion, I was able to focus on work. In the evening, after putting the children to bed, Allison asked me to join her in her bed, noting my improved condition. I refused, feeling almost normal for a week. I allowed myself to imagine a scenario in which Allison realized her mistake, fell back in love with me, and ended her relationship with Mayberry. But I did not lose my vigilance, realizing that these thoughts were just fantasies. This was confirmed when I watched the video taken on Thursday and saw my wife in a state of bliss making intimate contact with Mayberry. I could only stand it for a few minutes. Despite the satisfaction of knowing that this video could help me get sole custody of my children, I was overwhelmed by a wave of sadness. On Friday morning, I uploaded Allison's scandalous video to a paid website, offering Jezebel $5,000 to post it. By Friday evening, the money had been transferred to Allison's account and the video became available for viewing to paying customers. Unfortunately, Mayberry's face had to be pixelated due to the lack of a release, but I found solace in the fact that the video was posted in a section of the site called Wives Cheat on Their Husbands in the Marital Bed. It seemed appropriate. Over the next 2 weeks, 2 more videos were uploaded, resulting in 2 more amounts of $5,000 being transferred to Allison's account. Another $10,000 was transferred to Mayberry's account from the Cayman Islands company. I realized it was time to figure out the situation before Allison and Mayberry saw the bank statements at the end of the month and became confused. Convincingly pretending that I couldn't help but cry, Allison asked me to do something inappropriate, and I told her in a trembling voice that I wasn't ready for it yet. To my surprise, she was understanding, saying she would wait until I was ready. The next day, a security check was carried out on Mayberry after the 3rd video reached paying customers. The details of how this happened were clarified. I don't know exactly how, but the columnist somehow obtained an unedited version of the video in which Mayberry enters into an intimate relationship with Allison, as well as an extract from Mayberry's bank account. Mayberry was the 3rd person to be questioned that day, and it was obvious that he did not realize the importance of his interview. Knowing that the CEO would receive a report on the results of the lie detector, I managed to get a transcript of Mayberry's interview by the end of the day. During the interview, Mayberry was asked if he had any activities outside of work that could be used for blackmail. At first, he denied having any, but the lie detector showed the opposite. The expert then showed Mayberry the video and asked about his relationship with the woman. 2 weeks before, Mayberry's face paled as he weighed the consequences of lying and telling the truth. In the end, he decided to be honest. "Allison Banks, isn't she married to your colleague Brian Banks?" the interrogator asked him. Mayberry stammered and explained that Brian Banks worked for a related company in the same building. "It's a big building," he managed to say. "Have you ever thought that an affair with a married colleague is fraught with blackmail?" Mayberry was stunned. "I never thought about it," he admitted. Roger was asked about payments from foreign organizations since his last confession. "Absolutely none," he said. But when asked about contributions from corporations from the Cayman Islands, he was confused. "I don't know, it's probably a mistake," he stammered nervously. The reviewer expressed concern about the mistake made by 2 companies from the Cayman Islands whose affiliation remains unknown. "Yes, someone is trying to set me up," Mayberry complained, clearly upset. The reviewer then sarcastically asked if the video featuring Mayberry and Mrs. Banks was also fabricated. Despite trying to remain impartial, the reviewer ended the interview after a few questions. Mayberry was silent while the expert removed the electrodes from the lie detector. The expert then strictly warned him not to make any contact with anyone related to confidential information, neither with Mr. and Mrs. Banks nor with the 2 corporations that deposited money in his account. Mayberry was told that if he disobeyed, he would face prosecution. Despite the seriousness of the situation, after talking with Mayberry, I felt satisfied. After making sure that the children were asleep, we went to bed. As we lay side by side, I knew this would be our last intimate moment. I couldn't help but admire Allison's ability to play along with my teasers. Grinning, I told her that I would never sleep with her, given her possible affairs, including with Mayberry. The shock on her face was priceless. She stuttered and blushed, demanding to know what I meant. The next morning, I was helping the kids get ready for school under Allison's icy gaze. As soon as they left, I made a quick phone call, and a few minutes later, the doorbell rang. "It's for you, a walking woman," I joked. Allison blushed with anger and rushed to the door. "How dare you talk to me like that, you idiot," she grumbled. "It won't be long walking," I replied with a laugh. When Allison opened the door, the bailiff handed her the divorce papers. "Allison Banks, you have received a subpoena," he announced. Along with the divorce papers were incriminating photos of her relationship with Mayberry on a paid website, as well as a password for access. "Did you think I wouldn't know your dirty secrets, you lying woman?" I teased, while Allison stood at the kitchen table in disbelief. "Have you even seen what you look like on this site?" "Here's a reality check for you," I shouted, pointing to a piece of paper with the address and password. I was shocked when my assistant pointed this out to me. "It's bad enough that you disrespected me by sleeping with that jerk in our bed, but then you had to go out in public and take advantage of it." "I don't understand what's going on," she said, and tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm taking the kids for the weekend," I announced, getting up. Don't forget to hire the best lawyer you can find. Your income from professional porn will surely come in handy because you will need it." On the same day, Mayberry was fired and escorted out of the building. His security clearance was revoked. Just before I was about to leave to pick up the kids for the weekend, my secretary called through the intercom. "Brian, it's been reported that Roger Mayberry is drunk and in the parking lot shouting your name. Should I call the police?" I couldn't help but laugh. "No, Sherry, call Jack to come here immediately." The situation seemed too good to be true. When Jack arrived, we went to the window in our building from which we could clearly see where Mayberry was making a scene. It just so happened that this was one of the best places for surveillance cameras in the building. He was staggering back and forth, obviously drunk. Without wasting a second, Jack slipped out the side door and hid next to the building out of sight. I confidently walked out the front door, attracting Mayberry's attention. He immediately started hurling insults, accusing me of firing him and ruining his security clearance. When he lunged at me, I quickly headed to where Jack was waiting. I let Mayberry get close enough to swing at me, knowing that our plan was about to come to fruition. Even though I received only a light blow on my shoulder, I collapsed to the ground as if the most crushing blow in history had fallen on me. As Mayberry loomed over me, ready to strike again, Jack suddenly appeared in front of the camera, swiftly grabbed Mayberry, and delivered a powerful forearm blow to his jaw. Similar to grabbing a football field, Mayberry flew backwards and lost consciousness. Jack came to my rescue and helped me to my feet, while I feigned dizziness by leaning against a nearby car. Without hesitation, Jack dialed the emergency number. All this happened under the watchful gaze of surveillance cameras. The police arrived 3 minutes later, quickly handcuffed Mayberry to a stretcher, and sent him by ambulance to the hospital. I filed documents for assault charges. After that, I took the children and went to a picturesque mountain resort for the weekend. At the end of the trip, I broke the news to the children that Allison and I were getting divorced. Amber looked pleased, but the other 2 children were surprisingly calm, reassured by my promise to continue loving them as much as possible. When we returned on Sunday evening, Allison's reaction was not as negative as I expected. Anticipating a possible explosion, I took precautions. I transported valuables and most of my clothes to a secure, temperature-controlled storage facility. Despite this, I did not plan to leave the house. After the kids told her about our pleasant weekend, Allison and I started talking. Her first words were addressed to me. She noted my participation in the organization of the video, although she did not understand how I managed to do it. Despite being surprised by the conciliar tone, I did not apologize or admit my guilt. Instead, I just asked her to stop accusing me of something I clearly didn't do. I replied with a touch of indignation, fearing that she might be recording our conversation. "I've been busy this weekend, Brian. I hired a lawyer and a computer expert," she explained. "I still can't figure out how you managed to cover your tracks so well. It's not going to be easy for me to handle this." "I understand your concerns, Allison. I hope we can negotiate custody," I said. "Allison, we can resolve this issue. I suggest that you give me sole custody of the children and the house so that they have stability. In return, I will grant you extensive visitation rights. I'll even buy you a new house so that you and Mayberry can enjoy it." Did you hear that? He lost not only his job but his entire career. "I don't want to live in the same house with Roger." "It's not that," she began, but I quickly interrupted her. "I don't want to hear this, Allison," I pulled myself together and said. "You're free to be with whoever you want. I don't care. I'm just offering an option." After a moment of silence and a few tears, she said, "I understand that you may think I'm a bad mother, but I'm not. I love our children more than anything in the world, and I can't accept the thought that I won't be able to be with them. None of us benefits from fighting in court. I know that you will try to ruin my reputation, and I will not survive this. None of us wants the kids to know all the details or see the video. I agree that it is better to keep the children in the dark. What do you think we should do?" I asked, genuinely interested. "My lawyer recommends that we both agree to the services of an intermediary, preferably a former family court judge. I'm willing to consider sole or joint custody, and you can do the same. We will allow the mediator to assess the situation, take into account the preferences of the children, and obey his decision. If we keep the case confidential, we can come to a decision faster, she replied. I was pleasantly surprised by her discretion. She seems to have recognized my strong personality, perhaps through a conversation with Roger Mayberry. Let's set up a meeting with our lawyers next week to discuss and clarify the details, I suggested. I have one condition. I will not agree to joint custody. It's too difficult for children. I am asking for sole custody, but I will agree to it only if the mediator makes the appropriate decision. I let Allison occupy the master bedroom while I slept in the guest room, without revealing the reason, so as not to cause even more stress. But now that everything is open, I refuse to sleep in the same room where Mayberry dealt with her. During our joint meeting with the lawyers on Tuesday, we both instructed them to simply comply with our legal requirements without any negotiations. We agreed to divide the entire property of the spouses 50/50ths, with some exceptions based on the prenuptial agreement. This agreement excluded 90% of our fortune and also stipulated an intermediary, a former family court judge with a solid reputation. The contract also detailed the schedule of hearings with the mediator and the deadline for his decision, the amount of alimony that I would pay in case of sole or joint custody of Allison, and the duration of alimony payments to Allison in case of divorce. She was offended by the restrictions on communicating with Mayberry in the presence of children, but since she said she no longer wanted to see him, she reluctantly agreed to comply with them. In addition, she agreed not to talk to the children, trying to influence their testimony to the mediator. The agreement also stipulated how much Allison could spend from my funds on new housing, whether it was a house, a condominium, or an apartment, in case I received sole custody and she had to leave our current home. We spent the whole day discussing the specific arrangements that would be required in the case of joint custody or if one of us gets sole custody of the children. It was a long process, but we managed to come to an agreement. The potential mediator we contacted agreed to handle the case, and we discussed his remuneration, which would be equally divided from our joint property not covered by the prenuptial agreement. We also set a briefing date in 2 weeks and a hearing date in 4 weeks. I didn't feel obligated for Allison to officially include these details in the contract. After discussing this issue face-to-face, we came to an agreement that outsiders would not be allowed into our common house and that the person who would have to leave would do so within 2 weeks after the custody agreement was finalized. In addition, I promised that my lawyer would contact the paid site to remove her video and refund them the money. Fortunately, one call from Jezebel was enough to resolve this issue. I've never tried to change the kids' minds, and as far as I know, she hasn't tried either. We never exchanged unkind or sarcastic remarks, even in private. The only questionable behavior she demonstrated was walking around the house without outerwear when the children were asleep or they were not at home. I understood her motives, but out of frustration, I once asked her about it. On the day of the hearing, I was worried, even though I was sure that I had an advantage. I was hoping for sole custody, so the possibility of joint custody was the worst outcome I could imagine. As the hearing approached, my anxiety grew. The process seemed to be going well until the judge made a few remarks that made me wary. It seems he was leaning towards joint custody. Shortly before the children were supposed to be interviewed, he surprised us by offering to watch the interview on closed-circuit television. The mediator's request took me by surprise, and I couldn't agree to it. I'm sorry that I didn't realize this just a few minutes ago, but it will destroy the necessary frankness and trust in children. If one of you cannot agree to me meeting with each child alone, I will have to refund your money and give you a recommendation from another intermediary. Since the interviews with the children were supposed to take place tomorrow anyway, on the day they don't go to school, let me know. I was almost inclined to say that I did not agree and hoped that we could find another mediator less inclined to joint custody than this one. My lawyer urged me not to do this, citing Amber's hostility to Allison and the fact that the mediator listened to the children's preferences. Since Amber is approaching the age when she can make decisions on her own, the judge is likely to listen to her opinion more than to the opinion of any other mediator. Before leaving home, Allison and I met with our lawyers and agreed to the mediator's terms. We also agreed that we would not ask the children about what they said. Later that evening at dinner, Allison made a few remarks that I thought the children took as an expression of her desire for joint custody. I just gave her a hard look and didn't say anything in response. Amber caught my eye and smiled slightly. The next day, the mediator met with each of the children separately. The conversation with Jerry took about 20 minutes, with Whitney about half an hour, and Amber more than an hour. When Amber came out, after making sure Allison and her lawyer weren't looking, she gave me a thumbs up. According to our agreement, Allison's parents took the children to eat after the interview, telling them to return to our house around 4 p.m. After we stopped for lunch, the mediator was ready to make a decision. We didn't expect this. According to the agreement, he had another week to resolve the issue, so there were no obligations. He didn't even want to listen to the half-hour closing arguments that the lawyers had prepared. After carefully reviewing all the evidence and prioritizing the welfare of the children, I have decided to grant sole custody of all 3 children to their father, Brian Banks. In addition, I believe that the existing agreement agreed upon by both sides is fair and in the best interests of children. Therefore, the case will be resolved on the terms set out in the contract. On Monday, you will receive a certified copy of this decision to submit it to the family court along with the settlement agreement. Thank you for entrusting this case to me, and I wish you all the best in the future. Allison and I shed tears for different reasons. The atmosphere on the way home was heavy and sad. I didn't feel angry, and she looked depressed. The familiar feeling of sadness came over me again when our family breakup became final, although it was necessary and ended peacefully. For me, that evening, when we broke the news to the children, Allison was distant, so I had to lead most of the conversation. I hugged Allison warmly, and Amber hugged her. I spoke positively about Allison and explained the order of the visit a week after the hearing. I bought a new house for Allison, and she moved into it within the agreed-upon period of 2 weeks with the help of our children, her parents, and her brother. We assisted her with the move and also hired a transportation company to move large items such as the double bed from the master bedroom. A few months later, when the divorce was finalized, I threw a party at my house to express my gratitude to all the people who supported me, especially close friends and parents. I kept the purpose of the party a secret from the kids, just calling it a communal celebration, but my 13-year-old daughter, Amber, was able to figure it out for herself. Shortly before the guests arrived, Amber entered the room and closed the door. Then, she made me sit down and sat on my lap, asking a difficult question. When I asked her why she was doing this, she smiled broadly and told me that she had talked to an intermediary. She said she saw my mom and another man being overly affectionate in our house, and it had a negative impact on her. I was surprised and asked if she had actually witnessed it. Amber replied that it didn't matter because her mom was being unfaithful, and she wouldn't want to live with her if she got custody. Realizing that it was in Jerry and Whitney's best interests to stay with us, she shared the news with a big smile, then kissed me on the cheek and quickly left. I decided not to bring up this issue but focused on celebrating the victory and chasing Jezebel. Jezebel looked amazing at the party and quickly found common ground with Jerry and Whitney. She spent a lot of time playing baseball with Jerry and became close to both of them. She has succeeded in this field much more than I have. When Jezebel was talking to Whitney alone, I do not know what they were discussing, but it seems that they enjoyed each other's company, laughed, and chatted for quite a long time. Amber was a little shyer around Jezebel than the other kids, but she seemed to make a good impression on her. While they were discussing fashion, Jezebel tried to introduce me to our family. In the middle of the party, she pulled me aside into a booth, hugged me, and whispered, "Let your parents look after the children today, and you can come home with me. I promise you'll be safe when I bring you back tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, but I can't guarantee that you'll be fully conscious." Without waiting for an answer, she gave me a seductive kiss and stormed out of the room. That night, Jezebel nearly drove me crazy with desire. When I left, I confessed to Jezebel, "I don't know what you see in me, but I enjoy being with you. Can there be a real connection between us? I see you as a kind, generous, and intelligent person. How about taking me to the resort with you for 3 days starting on the 14th, so that we can determine if we both want a serious relationship? To be honest, I'm tired of casual relationships. I need a man who belongs only to me." After kissing me, she closed the door behind me, urging me to return to my beautiful children. 2 years after this momentous event, my life has undergone many changes. All 3 children do well at school, live in society, and play sports. They are well adapted and happy. Allison is responsible for her visitation rights and maintains a positive relationship with her children. Amber has also improved her relationship with Allison and even spent last summer at her parents' lake house with the kids without any problems. Besides, my business is booming, and I am experiencing financial success like never before. Information about my involvement in transactions with companies surfaced by accident, as the report that we provided to the government was mistakenly sent to employees who should not have seen it. Despite this, the attitude of others towards me has not changed. Roger Mayberry left town shortly after the victory celebration, and according to the only employee who still keeps in touch with him, he got a job as a simple salesman for an electronics company on the West Coast that does not work with secret technologies. The children fully accepted Jezebel as a friend, not as a mother, and enjoyed her company immensely. 2 years later, Jezebel decided that we should be exclusive. She recently sold her adult website and moved in with me and the kids. Although marriage is out of the question, she devotes herself only to me and takes on maternal responsibilities towards the children while simultaneously running a small business selling specialized clothing over the internet.